in our series on the various relationship of the religions to the Gnosis, we have come now to a particular subject which deals to a large extent really with the contemporary religions, and which should give us some good opportunity for comparison. The usual way in which in religion classes, which I taught in school for a long time, the division between the various great religions is portrayed is the monotheistic religions and polytheistic religions, whereby all of the religions that originate in the Middle East are monotheistic religions, while the Asian religions have maintained the polytheistic format. Now, to kind of entertain you, and also because there are fewer people here than would embarrass me otherwise, I'm going to explain this a little bit in a dramatic form. And let's say if you should be near a synagogue, or in the Europe we often call them temple of the Jewish religion, you would hear from time to time the cantor, which is really a Latin word meaning singer, you know. The cantor intone, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So there is the emphasis on the unity, on the oneness. At the same time, if you are in the battle zone right now in the Holy Land, then you would probably or any of the other Muslim countries, you would hear several times a day from the narrow extensions of the various mosques, the voice of the muezzin, the caller, who would call forth. In any event, he would call forth the. I'll have it in Arabic in a minute. Oh my goodness, we are going to the dogs. What happens anyway? That there is only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. So let's say the affirmation, almost desperate affirmation of that unitary nature of the divine is present in all. And of course there are historical reasons for it, because for instance when it comes to Islam, which is the latest of these, then we are informed that in the city of Mecca, which was a holy city long before Muhammad came, you know, and there was at least that's how the descriptions go. I think I mentioned that before. There was a bigger sort of round plaza, and all along the periphery of that circle stood 365 gods and goddesses, of their statues, and it was Muhammad's desire, eventually realized, that he's going to do away with all of these gods and goddesses. But now there are some things that I would be executed for if I said this somewhere else. Among them being that there was a god named Allah before Muhammad. Allah. But he also had a wife, Allat. But of course she got lost in the shuffle subsequently. But in any event, it's actually a lesson in how monotheistic religions generally develop. Namely, it usually starts out with many gods and many goddesses. And then some prophet, some reformer comes along who picks out one of these many and then declares that one as the only one and does away with the rest. And that is what happened with Islam. It happens frequently when those developments take place. In any event, let's say the notion of the unitary character of the deity was present and has appeared time and again, because while Judaism, Christianity, which is an outgrowth of Judaism, and Islam are regarded at this particular time as the chief monotheistic religions, there are others, and many of them are older, and in some respects perhaps more prestigious than these. And so if you went to India, in some places you would find very beautifully sculpted, very fashionably constructed temples, wherein one of the interesting features would be, in most of them, that there are galleries around the temple. And on these galleries lie prostrate, which is the only way that they can lie, dead people, dead bodies. And the reason for that being that what we are talking about now is a Zoroastrian temple. And in the Zoroastrian faith, which is very monotheistic, in the Zoroastrian faith, you are not supposed to desecrate the earth by burying dead bodies in it. Neither are you allowed to desecrate a fire by burning bodies. So what is left is the element of air. And therefore the bodies are laid out on these galleries. And for one thing, the ubiquitous vultures are very pleased by this arrangement, and they come around and pick a bit of human flesh off of these carcasses, and then gradually that way the dead bodies disappear. Now that is one of the oldest monotheistic religions, and the only reason that you find it only in India is because they were chased out of their own country, which was Persia or Iran, and so they moved down to India, where they are generally known as the Parsis. Parsi meaning Persian, and interestingly enough, owing to the fact that they were outside of the caste system, which I'm sure they were happy about, they managed to enter various professions. They were not limited like the Hindus were. And as a result of that, the Parsis, Zoroastrians on the whole, are very well situated financially. Most of them own businesses, and they are a very elegant religion. The Zoroastrian priests still wear the old Persian ceremonial hat, which goes up like this. It's a very interesting looking thing. We saw them as the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago some time ago. And we also had for a number of years, which was especially pleased me, we had here in Los Angeles for maybe about 2 years' time consecutively, although he came at other times too, a Zoroastrian high priest from Bombay, my old friend Dr. Framrose Bode, who was also a big friend of Manly Hall, and who used to conduct classes and gave lectures at Philosophical Research Society on Zoroastrianism. And after about a year and a half, we managed to persuade him, not without difficulty, that he should perform a Zoroastrian fire ceremony for us. Because up to that he would just chant the gathas of Zarathustra, which are in ancient Avestic Persian. They sound very, very beautiful, but we wanted a little bit more. So at the center of the stage of Philosophical Society, Research Society, we set up a big table. On the table were various objects, and one of them a sort of the big cauldron-like device. I think it was made out of stone, and under it there was a fire. The fire is sacred and should not be, as I mentioned, should not be desecrated with dead bodies, but you can burn otherwise. And then, while chanting again the various gathas, the hymns of Zarathustra, the priest would throw, like a magician, he would throw different colored powders into the fire. We throw in one and chants away, and it flames up red all the way up to the ceiling. And then the next one he throws in, it flames up green, flames up blue, flames up yellow. And so it's the chanting of the hymns is accompanied by this light show, which of course we all enjoyed very greatly. So there is another important ancient monotheistic faith that we need to keep in mind, so perhaps now, as this is in a joint fashion now today, the conjunction of the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, the festival of lights, which is like so many Judaic ceremonies, are commemorations of historical events from the past of the faith. This is the commemoration of a particular time when the Jewish people, who apparently were prone to such unfortunate developments, had been imprisoned, had been enslaved, no longer in Egypt, no, that went with Moses, but in Babylon, which is also the same as Persia. And when they finally let them go, then they were able to go home and to take the sacred lights of the temple with them. and light them once again. And that is really the meaning of the commemorative festival of Hanukkah. So now we can see that the idea of a unitary Godhead, of concentrating on a unitary God, was fairly widespread, particularly among the religions that started in the Middle East, and that it created let's see, very important spiritual developments among those people where it existed. Now, we can sort of speculate about that sort of thing, even as we can speculate about others. Why would a monotheistic faith create such intense and abiding devotion as stronger and more enduring for the most part than probably just about all of the polytheistic faiths? And one of the possible explanations for that being that somehow the ability of the human psyche to envision the ineffable greatness of transcendence in a singular and unitary fashion is particularly impressive. Now, I don't mean to say that the gods and the goddesses of the ancient world, of the ancient Mediterranean, like the Egyptian, for about, I shall say more in a minute, the Greek, the Roman, and of the various barbarian tribes, that these were not important and very impressive. But somehow the idea that the Lord our God is one, this unitary concept is of very great power and carries a great deal of conviction. Although you also have to keep in mind that, as in so many respects, there can be a certain deceptive element which one needs to cut across. And of course, one of these is, for instance, that in some cases, particularly the ancient Egyptian, which is of very great importance because of its extreme antiquity and also because of its really considerable esoteric and I might even say Gnostic overtones. After all, even such incidents as the discovery of the Nag Hammadi books, like Nag Hammadi library, and other really ancient sources, where were they discovered? In Egypt. And so we need to keep in mind that Egypt was a source of immense spiritual creativity. And part of this creativity was derived from a circumstance, and I actually brought with me a little book which, as I always do, I left in the office, so I will have to sort of summarize it, of a particular feature of the ancient Egyptian religion which is seldom recognized, although it was certainly of great importance in classical antiquity. And that is the worship, the commemoration of a deity called Atum, who appeared as the supreme and transcendental deity of ancient Egypt. So we always hear about Isis, Osiris, and Horus, and various other Egyptian deities. These are really lesser deities, and it was envisioned and known particularly to certain orders of the priesthood, that above and beyond these deities there was another, and that was the supreme deity called Atum. Now his descendants, those deities that were, so to say, the children, such as the sun god Atum Ra, then Ra was added to Atum, but they all came from the original source. Now, inasmuch as I have this curious obsession with Alexander the Great, and I was immediately impressed when I read the book by that French scholar, whose name I won't appear to me right now, but I'll bring the book with later on. Very, very fine and very exciting and romantic author, early 20th century. According to him, it was as the result of a particular invocation of Atum, the supreme, whom the Greeks recognized as the supreme deity also, not just the Egyptians, because even Plato himself and Aristotle said, both of them, that all the Greek goddesses were aspects of Isis. So you see, the Egyptian model stood there as something of extremely important and unusual importance. In this case, it was the supreme Egyptian deity Atum who was invoked and who became the father of Alexander the Great, because as is described mainly in an imaginative fashion by various authors, in part sexually toned ceremony was performed, at which time the lady who became the mother of King Alexander, and who was the wife of King Philip, had conceived the divine seed of Atum, and when it was born, this was Alexander the Great. Now, you may say that's a nice romantic story, but it's more than that, because let's say at least in my opinion, from looking through various his historical records, I am convinced that this inspiration from what the Egyptians themselves conceived of as the ultimate pinnacle of deity, the father of all the gods, Atum, and the connection with Atum, there was one that continued throughout history. And from time to time, we find incidents, usually when something very important is about to happen, and usually something important that is good rather than bad, that the presence of Atum is recognized, and that somehow the spiritual effulgence of ancient Egypt, as one can tell by various symbols, returns. Now, where do you think that, I probably mentioned this before, but where do you think that this was particularly evident? In my humble or not so humble opinion, it was evident when a great spiritual development, a great effusion of a perennial and perennially important spirituality came into the world with the coming of the Renaissance. Now we got to maybe call to mind a little bit as to how that happened, and perhaps in certain ways why that happened. The Turks, who were always a problem, the Armenians can tell you what problem the Turks can be. The Turks were coming, and they had already conquered some of the ancient territories of Greece and were coming closer. And then somehow, unknown to anyone, without any concrete historical explanation, a large collection of books, which were all attributed to the god Hermes, the god of wisdom, who in turn, if you like to play around with these things, who in turn is a manifestation of the Egyptian god Thoth. When you see, I have one little statue in my house of Thoth in his animal form, because the Egyptian gods all had an animal form, and it is a bird with a great big beak that is the animal form of Thoth. The zoological manifestation of the god of wisdom. And one of the, as Alvin Boyd Kuhn, my teacher, who was a great Egyptologist, was one to point out, that the Egyptians were extremely keen observers of nature, and they managed to combine natural phenomena which they observed with spiritual meaning. And for instance, the bird, which let me see now what the ibis, the ibis bird. Yeah, the ibis bird is the bird of Thoth. So the ibis bird can be observed out in nature, in the desert, and so forth, as running about usually at great speed and going from one point of geographical point to another, and also sometimes from one place where there are other creatures, birds and so forth, goes there, talks to those birds, and then he runs like nobody's business across the desert to another spot, and there he talks to the others. So the Egyptians felt that this was a symbol of the god of discourse, the god of communication, the one who goes from one group to the other, from one place to the other, and carries the important news that people should know. For which reason I have also a great deal of reverence for Thoth Hermes. But let us say his appearance then in Egyptian mythology and in the great myth of the death and resurrection of Osiris, he plays a very important role, because Thoth Hermes, which is his Greek name, once again the Greeks recognize that, this Thoth, whether he's in his bird form or any other way, this Thoth is wise. He's an embodiment of wisdom, and he communicates wisdom. And so they regarded him very highly, and they came to combine his concept and his name with what? With Hermes, the Greek god of wisdom. And so the Egyptian wise god now came to be combined with the Greek wise god. Now then, not to keep you waiting here, falling asleep in an untimely manner. What this meant was that Hermes, being the god of wisdom, had communicated from time to time with the human race. And these communications, particularly under Greek influence, although the Egyptians had their own hieroglyphic writing, under Egyptian influence, these communications were written down, they were in books. And the Greeks were aware that there were the Hermetic books, books of Hermes, and that these were the books of wisdom. And in fact, the unfortunate circumstance that after the coming of Christianity and various other usual Near Eastern difficulties, much of that wisdom was lost. Because what people frequently do, I mean, the kind of people whom we should shun and have very little to do with, what they love to do is to destroy important books. I don't like to get too personal once again, although more recently I have done so, but let's say I remember in December of 1944 in northern Hungary, where I was at my great aunt's country residence, how the incoming Soviet Russian troops treated books. They treated the books worse than women, and that's saying something, you know. And all the beautiful old books bound in leather, many of them handwritten, you know, in beautiful colored inks and so forth, out in the snow, torn apart and so forth. And so and even though I was 13 years old merely at the time it came to me, this is the symbol of what unwisdom does to wisdom. All it knows is how to destroy it, how to denigrate it. But ultimately wisdom cannot be destroyed. Or wisdom will find its own coterie, it will find those who desire it, who want to be part of it, and who will then with that wisdom make the world wiser. So what I am hinting at here is that all of a sudden there appeared in the north of Italy a large collection of books, and these were all in Greek, and they were the lost books of Hermes. The Corpus Hermeticum, as it was called in Latin, the body of Hermetic writings. Unfortunately, the ability of people to recognize important and wise things, having been fairly strong at the time, people began to recognize that this was something important. And the Medici princes, particularly Cosimo Medici the Great, you know, they were the richest people in Italy. And you know, when it comes to buying rare books and sponsoring beautiful pieces of art and so forth, it kind of helps to have some money. And they sure had it. So the Medici princes swooped down on this Hermetic library, and I said, this is it. These are the books of wisdom of Hermes. We were waiting for these. Here it is, and they have to be translated now because they were in ancient Greek. And in fact, they took the translator, I forget his name now, who was commissioned by the Medici to translate the works of Plato from Greek into Italian. Now, Plato was an extremely highly regarded person for a long time. And he was generally referred to as, even in Latin, as Divus, the divine one, the divine Plato. And yet the Medici said, stop with the Plato and start translating the Hermetic books. And one cardinal, I think his name was Patrici, you know, when I don't want to remember a name, then I remember them. Cardinal Patrici went to the Pope and he said, Holiness, these are the most important books that we can have. And they should be, or at least some of them, should be included in the canon with the sacred scripture of the Old and the New Testament. Needless to say, the Pope who was on the throne at that time didn't listen to him, unfortunately. But the books were still held in very, very high regard. Now, so here were the Egyptian God of Wisdom's books that had come to Europe and that became, and no one no scholar and no student of these matters will ever deny that the coming of these Hermetic books had an immense influence of the Western culture of the time. Now, unfortunately, it is also true, and maybe I'll get around to indicating a little prophetic statement about that of a Gnostic nature, that when something really wonderful, something really great and glorious is about to happen, you can count on some nasty influence to come in to try to spoil it. And this is mentioned in Jung's 7 Sermons to the Dead, which it had been my privilege years ago to translate, and which is still available in book form. Namely, that there is something that pushes against wisdom. There is something that pushes against goodness. There is something that pushes against a peaceful and happy development of human consciousness. Something there that is trying to stop it. Now you may say, now Stephan is going to put forth a demonology. Well, maybe so, maybe not. But the fact of the matter is that, like so many of these things, we can detect the presence and the unfortunate results of the activities of this principle within ourselves. Many, many times when I felt I was right on the edge of discovering, I mean, I'm not Thomas Alva Edison or something like that, not that kind of a discovery. But you know what? Thomas Alva Edison was a member of the Theosophical Society. We have the copy of his membership diploma. He really was. But let's say that is not an important element in the picture. The picture is that when something really good is trying to happen to you as an individual, something that would really make you happy, something that would be conducive to a nice chapter at least in your life, something will come along and try to spoil it. And we have to be aware of that, because if we are not, then we are going to have a much more unhappy or less happy life than we otherwise had. And if I wanted to play around with things like that, I could sort of count at various points in my life, I could count a number of years. These were the good years until the devil came and took them. You know? And Others might say, well, how can you say such a thing? Well, I can say it because I lived through it. That's how I can say it. So this seems to be something that is present. And I might as well get way ahead of myself also and say that in C.G. Jung's astonishing little early book, The 7 Sermons to the Dead, there is a passage wherein Jung, or whoever is inspiring him, says that every star in the other world, in the greater world, every star is a god. And the dark places that are between the stars, every dark space is a devil. He uses the German word Teufel, which is devil. I think it would be more elegant to use demon, but I translated it exactly as it is there. So, with this, of course, being a symbol that we have the possibility of encountering great and valuable and wonderful and transformative and insight-producing things in life. But watch out, because they also can be taken from us in one way or the other. And our ordinary faculties, our ordinary mental and psychological powers often do not suffice to discern and then to fight off these influences, even as this occurs in history. So you look out now with all the terrible warfare that is happening once again, and you say, well, all right, why didn't somebody do something about it? Sure. Yeah. Why not? Well, because by the time it becomes possible or even likely and probable to be able to stop these very unfortunate developments in human history, by that time it is usually too late. Too late. So what does this require? It requires an uncanny alertness on our parts. We should look out and we should watch out. We should watch out for the divine, we should watch out for the good, but also for the opposition to the good. Because if we look out for it, then we might be able to prevent it. And this, the study of history reveals this in a crystal clear manner. Some of the worst, most disastrous developments in history could have been deflected and could have been prevented if they had been recognized in their full pernicious nature early enough. But when they are not, then they come and take over. And that, of course, is very unfortunate. So jumping back to the Renaissance again, as I say, the papacy did not include the Hermetic books in the canon of the Bible, but was in favor of them very greatly nevertheless. And so, largely as the result, and this cannot be denied, largely as the result of these books and their content, there was an intellectual and spiritual flourishing, primarily in the Mediterranean area, of an almost unprecedented nature. Now, of course, let's say this was, it was intuited, it was suspected that something of this sort might take place earlier, but didn't come to pass. Where did Julius Caesar and subsequently Caesar Augustus, his relative, it was his nephew really. Where did they go when they wanted to find something really important, an intellectual and a spiritual treasure? Where did they go? To Egypt. Clear down after the French Revolution, which in my estimation wasn't a very happy event. I had an ancestor there at that time, and he came back from France, and he really didn't like what was going on. He said he wanted to settle somewhere which would be as far away from France as possible. This was my great-great-great-grandfather. And he did. You know what that place was? Hungary. It was about as far as and probably he added to it also, and still being a civilized country. But the push toward Egypt. Who went to Egypt right after the French Revolution? Well, Napoleon, the little pot-bellied Frenchman, and his troops. And among all the other things that they may have accomplished there, by way of one of the scholars whom they took with them, by the name of Jean-François Champollion, they deciphered the Egyptian hieroglyphics for the first time in history. Now, that was a monumental discovery, because, here is all of this interesting writing, beautiful writings of wisdom, of mythology, of history, and people couldn't read it. Now but what Champollion found some documents were in Greek and Coptic, Coptic is a kind of a hybrid language because it uses the Greek alphabet, but it uses the Egyptian words. So Champollion discovered documents that contained messages in all of these languages together, and he said, aha, this is what this means, and this is what that means, and that is how the hieroglyphics were first discovered. So let's see, now we are in the 19th century, and let's say the Egyptian influence, the meaning that ancient Egypt gave to the human consciousness is always there and comes forth from time to time. I had another relative, particularly my mother's family, just a lot of relatives, what can I do? In any event, this one was a Hungarian gentleman who incidentally, his story, or some of his story, was included in a not very accurate manner, but still included in the movie The English Patient. That was my mother's cousin, the English Patient. And he would go back and forth between our country and Egypt, because during the war, and even before World War II, he became one of the chief instructors in the art or in aviation of the Egyptian government. So he taught the Egyptians how to fly airplanes, which somehow Osiris and Isis and those old boys did not teach them. In any event, I know that on those occasions when he managed to come back to Hungary, he would say that the most fascinating place in the world, with the most fascinating history, is without a doubt Egypt. And I'm sure he was right. And the Egyptians did well by him. I know that this is not terribly important to you, But when after the war, Uncle Laci, as we would call him, his name was Ladislaus, that's my grandmother's name, Almasi, when he came back to Hungary, well, of course, the Hungarian communists immediately put him in jail. Why? Only they know. Because he was from a prominent family, because obviously he would not serve their cause. So there he was, and so what happened was he had become so friendly with the Egyptian establishment of that time that King Farouk, who with his considerable bulk was still on the throne at that time, sent his own cousin to Budapest. And the cousin said to the Hungarian Communist government, "You let that man out, let me take him back to Egypt. If you don't do that, we are going to disrupt all diplomatic contact between Egypt and Hungary." And I guess some of the communists thought that there was still some good stuff in Egypt that they needed, particularly some good cigarettes, and so they let my relative go, and he managed to live to a fairly good old age, although he was not injured in the manner portrayed in the movie. But let us say we had people over there from time to time who, in various ways, recognized the incredible power and depth of the Egyptian civilization and its possible influence on many things in Europe. If you read some of the books, particularly the little small books that were made out of lectures of my late teacher Alvin Boyd Kuhn, including his study of death and his quite a number of others, the esoteric structure of the alphabet, you can see that right to this day, and I mean this was a PhD from Columbia and knew his Egyptian hieroglyphics very, very well. So he knew what he was writing about. He said, to this day you can discover remnants of the ancient Egyptian religion in various European languages. So that, let's say, Egypt was a heck of a place, and its influence endured for an extremely long period of time, perhaps in some respects to the present time itself. Now, jumping back a little bit again, so here were the Hermetic books translated into Italian and other languages in Italy by commission of the Medici princes, and the result of which was an upsurge of wisdom, of philosophy, of art, of magic, you name it. All the unusual and wonderful things were all of a sudden there. And the interesting other little signs, which I consider to be signs, but then a reputable historian probably wouldn't consider them as such, but signs that Egyptian artifacts, already then, before Napoleon, were brought over to Italy. If you go to Rome, in the Piazza di San Pietro, before the Saint Peter's Basilica, and the center of the place is what? An Egyptian obelisk. Huge, it goes up and up and up and up. Now, of course, the popes had to Christianize it a little bit. They like to do things like that, And so on top of it, they put a little statue of Saint Peter. So why not? I'm sure Saint Peter is happy up there. But the fact of the matter was that there was, in my not so humble opinion, there was an incursion, an entry of the remnants of ancient Egyptian, particularly Hermetic wisdom, into Europe, and particularly into Italy at that time, which was of immense significance, immense importance. Just like Alexander the Great had to go all over the known world with his troops and then go back to Egypt and then walk out into the desert, and he was seen no more, never turned up. Now what do you suppose happened? You think the jackals or the hyenas ate him there? I doubt it. But rather, Alexander, as the French historian said at the title of his book, Alexander was a god. And gods don't die like you and I. They find other ways of going back into the divine world. And then, centuries later, comes the Renaissance. And people are studying the Hermetic books. People are writing materials that deal with the Hermetic wisdom. In other words, the rebirth, the one major rebirth since the time of Jesus of the esoteric tradition was in the Renaissance, primarily in Italy, although of course it spread to other places too. But you see the way those things happen, as I indicated, when something good is about to happen, something bad is trying to do away with it. And so it happened too. And that trouble was, as much as respect as I have for the German nation and for the German language and German literature and all that, from the cold wastes of Germany came people to Italy. They were led by a beer-drinking, portly German monk by the name of Martin Luther. And they couldn't stand what was going on in Italy. These Italians were getting wise. Moreover, which is really a great sin in Lutheran and Calvinist eyes, these Italians were having fun. You know, the greatest sin of them all. And that is what didn't put exactly an end to the Renaissance, but certainly made it very difficult for the Renaissance to continue. It was very, very, very unfortunate. But let us say also, now I am throwing out my heterodox historical ideas to you, and you are certainly in no ways requested to believe them. But I do. That there also came a cardinal. He came from Spain. His name was Sergio de Borja. And subsequently he was elected Pope, and his papal name was Pope Alexander VI, and he was from a distinguished Spanish family, which, however, had all kinds of North African connections. And these connections, in turn, brought about the fact that he had his papal coat of arms, you know, the big ecclesiastics like popes, cardinals, or so, they choose their own heraldic devices, their coats of arms. So he, first of all, when he was elected Pope, as they always do, the important cardinals came up to him and asked him, "Holy Father, what name do you choose?" He looked them in the eyes and he said, "We choose the name of the immortal Alexander." and he became Alexander VI. So, already there you can see a certain sign. The other one being that the Borgia family, who were noted Spanish grandees, has a coat of arms, which is a white bull. Who had a white bull? Osiris. In fact, the sacred animal of Osiris, into which he changes occasionally, and that's not a lot of bull, is the white bull. And so here, the white bull of Osiris was enthroned at the Vatican, and the Renaissance was in full swing. Something happened. These things happen from time to time. And they are really, in many ways, these unusual, mysterious spiritual events that occur. These are the hope of the world. Because if it weren't for them, the world would have already completely deteriorated into misery, stupidity, and dirt. And that is what we need to pray for. That is what we need to envision. So we need to pray to Atum, or whatever name we find, to bring to us his messengers, his books, his people who are inspired by him, and turn around the dreadful way into which our civilization has increasingly changed, and which assuredly would lead to very disastrous results if it is not turned around. But as I say, the opposition is always there, and the opposition in that case came. And now, I'm not an inquisitor. My name is not Thomas Torquemada, or Jimenez de Cisneros. These were the great inquisitors of old Spain. But let's say the Protestant Reformation shut down the Renaissance. And that was a terrible thing to happen. And the clock of history turned back into an era that was full of fighting. Does that sound familiar a little bit, like maybe of the present time? Full of fighting, full of cruelty, full of very unpleasant things all over Europe and the Mediterranean. And then, of course, these unpleasantries were reinforced by Allahu Akbar, the coming of the Turks, which was a pretty bad and a pretty difficult situation. My country, where I was born and raised, most of the country suffered under Turkish rule for 150 years, and the Balkan countries even longer. So it was bad. And Greece, about 500 years. How do you like that? How those poor Greeks are still alive, I don't know. In any event, there was, a very evident big enemy. And then there were all the confusions as those things happened in Europe itself. Now, when I came in, because of the books that I was talking about, came to my mind that the occasion for C.G. Jung writing the 7 Sermons to the Dead, and me having the good fortune of encountering that text at a time when literally nobody knew anything about it except Jung himself, that there is a a sign along these lines, because what happened was later on, now comes the Reformation, the religious wars, all of the balderdash, Pope Alexander wasn't there anymore, others came, and then into the lovely little state country of Switzerland, which produces some of the best cheese and number of other things, in came the awesome and terrifying and bloodthirsty spectre of John Calvin, Johannes Calvinus, from whom incidentally all the now very innocuous Presbyterian churches in the USA and in Scotland, although the Scots had their share of nastiness there too with John Knox. He wasn't a very pleasant guy to have around. In any event, there came John Calvin, who established himself in Geneva, a very nice place. And while he was in Geneva, he discovered that there were a whole bunch of Swiss around in various portions of the land who were what were called it's really a Greek word, Anabaptists. Now, an Anabaptist is not like an American Baptist, a Southern Baptist or something. Ana means again. The German word for it is Wiedertäufer, again baptizers. In other words, these were a Protestant sect, after all, the Protestants have come now, who said that just the one baptism when you're a baby or so is not enough. So you've got to be baptized again. And Calvin didn't like it. So what did Calvin do? He had his minions around, and they would take the Anabaptists and drown them in the Swiss lakes. The Lake of Zurich being one. So now what happened? Many, many years later, someone who was certainly not an Anabaptist by the name of Carl Jung built a beautiful little summer house for himself in Küsnacht on one end of the Lake of Zurich, and was very happily ensconced there in the summertime until people began to tell him that they were finding ancient corpses, dead bodies in the lake. So what was eventually discovered was that these were the remnants of the Anabaptists after Calvin got done with them. So they drowned them. They drowned them in the lake. Now, okay, well, things like that happen in history, but the interesting thing was that very soon after this discovery was made, Carl Jung, sitting in his garden in the evening in Küsnacht, would see ghosts of the dead coming out of the lake, marching across his property, across his kitchen, and up the stairs into the house. Many of them. And then he was inspired to write something that starts, "The dead came back to from Jerusalem, where they did not find what they were seeking." The first line of the 7 sermons to the dead. So there were really dead there. When I heard this first, I think mainly from Dr. Shamdasani, I didn't want to believe him. But one has to believe Shamdasani, because he knows an awful lot. Very great guy, very great man. So that was, let's say, the incident, the occult incident that triggered that particular Gnostic line of thought that Jung started on, and which subsequently led to his entire writing of the Red Book, because the Seven Sermons to the Dead was the first little fragment that he wrote, and it is also, Dr. Shamdasani included it in Jung's Red Book as an appendix, the entire longer version. Now then, in any event, what happened? These were the things that suppress the good things that happen in history. These were the influences that suppressed the Hermetic Renaissance. If they could have, they would have suppressed Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and all the great Renaissance artists and writers. Why? Because they are nasty. They are bent upon destroying that which is beautiful and might take the human soul to a higher level. And in different other historical periods, they take on a different name. They may no longer be Calvin's followers, but they may be Lenin's followers. But they do the same thing. They want to do away with everything that is beautiful. They want to do away with everything that is inspiring, that is holy, that is transcendental, so that nothing is left but them. Their prosaic, materialistic, uncomprehending selfhood, which then brings all kinds of terrible things in its wake. But let us say, while that is the case, let's say the gods like Hermes, the gods like Alexander and others, they have not gone away. The entry of the transcendental, of the deific into human life is always present. There is something, if you don't mind me fantasizing, something like a great river of wisdom, of goodness, of holiness, of insight, of transformation that forever pours from the great structure of the eternal. And it will not go away. It will come and it will do its work. Of course, once again, we have to keep in mind that as these great and wonderful and inspiring things come, the opposition, of course, rises also. And one has to be aware of that, and one has to be able to somehow withstand that. In fact, now I'll really put my neck out on the chopping block, and you're certainly not obliged to believe me, but I am convinced at this point that the ongoing and at the present time very, very virulent conflict in the Middle East, in part, is a reaction to the discovery of wisdom in the Middle East. In other words, this is the reaction of the demonic against the wisdom that came with Nag Hammadi and with other discoveries, because there is a force in the structure that cannot abide the kind of influence that would bring humanity to a greater insight, to greater wisdom, to greater transformation. It will try to bring in things that will destroy that. And that is what we need to keep in mind. We need to very much keep in mind when the the false inspiration comes, you should now start fighting with each other. Here, the two monotheistic religions, the two oldest religions were, other than Egypt, of course, in the Middle East also, fighting with each other to the death. If you can resist that, if you can find some ways around, I am not making any kind of political statement, but a way that we need to recognize that to fight each other, to torture each other, to bring each other to a bad end is not the way we are supposed to go. You know that that also is known to very few people who haven't studied those things. You know that Jerusalem was the original holy city of Islam. The Muslims, to this day, they pray when they are praying, they are facing the holy city of Mecca. But that's not how it started. They were facing Jerusalem. But there were, even as now, there were other people in Jerusalem who said, get away from me, we don't want you guys around here. And then they couldn't do it anymore. And then the Prophet founded the new city, the city of the Prophet, Medina. And that became the holy city. So, these are all curious little incidents of history which, to say the least, they give you a reason for thinking, In any event, there we are. Now difficult times came upon the Mediterranean area and upon all of the West. There's no doubt about it. And they went on and on. And they came to the World War I, they came to World War II, and they were still there. And somehow that subtle, sweet heritage of wisdom was on the verge of being menaced and ultimately destroyed. However, fortunately, that only went so far. And so we need to keep in mind that let's say, so I don't get too much wound up in these historical circumstances, we need to keep in mind that the awareness of certain other than natural phenomena in life is an extremely important part of human life. Whichever era of history you look at, you will find people there who are aware of at least two, if not three, non-natural levels of reality: preternatural and supernatural. Now, preternatural largely consists of that which is sort of within but beside nature. It is combined with, interwoven with nature. Nature spirits, the spirits of the dead, things of that sort. But the supernatural comes straight from the realm of transcendence and must therefore be given attention to. Now, I shall probably come back to these later, but I thought it may be useful if I read off to you a little summation of what I felt in my recognitions of the principles of transcendental life. These are principles which in some way or the other I feel should be, must be incorporated into the consciousness of humans in order for humans to be really humans and in order for good things to develop in the world. Number one, that there is a higher power and its presence has to be taken into account. If we don't have that, we don't have anything. Now, I could care less as to whether this higher power is called Jehovah, whether it's called Allah, whether it's called Bob. You know, my cousin used to make joke about the new religion of the god Bob. So it may not be of great stimulus to you, but it's there. So in any event, unless an underlying awareness of this transcendent, of the existence of this transcendental dimension, whatever its name or no name is present, humanity will fare badly. And that is perhaps one of the principal great difficulties of our world today, especially of the Western world. The second point being that the higher power that we just spoke about has an intentionality which may be discovered. It is not without its own designs. It is not without its own plan. If you want to, say it in a sort of old-fashioned manner, God has a plan with you and for you. There is somebody there who plans something for you. And therefore, you got to listen, you got to look. Because if you won't listen and you won't look, then you will never know it. And yet it's not that important. It is, for one thing, the divine can dole this out to you in little increments. But whether you get it in a large increment or a small one, it will be to your benefit. Third being, the supreme intentionality of the higher power is the advantage, is the advancing of the discovery of the use of the essence indwelling in the human. What all of the developments, what all the theologies, all the theosophies, all the sciences really drive at, what they are really here for, what they are trying to tell you is that inside of you there is a transcendental, supernal essence, and that you can make contact with that, you can make it active, and as the result of that activity, you can have a much, much wiser, much, much happier, much more wonderful life. And the third being that the supreme identity of the higher power is the advancing of the discovery and the use of this that indwells in the human. If you don't mind me being now in conclusion somewhat highfalutin here, the sun and the moon and the stars, the mountains and the rivers, the lakes, have all come into existence so that you may learn how to become yourself, your real self. That's why they are here for, not for any other reason. Really and truly. And you might say that's very arrogant. Well, you know what? The divine created an arrogant being when it created us. And I don't mind being arrogant in that fashion, because I don't mind giving recognition to that incredible reality that dwells deeply within us. So now the human is entitled, and this here I may get some opposition, but I love opposition. So, except in politics. The human is enlightened to make use of the products of the earth for his own sustenance and for the procuring of its own resources. In other words, what we find here, we can use. Don't be afraid. Don't think that you have to live on Brussels sprouts for the rest of your life. But whatever you can find and that redounds to your benefit, you make use of it. Finally, the fifth one, the ultimate objective of the human is the discovery and the exercise of his own divine essence that is recognized in all the spiritual traditions under such names as Spirit, Atman, Buddha, Spirit, and so forth. And this is what it is all about. We are not here to conquer the earth. We are not here to conquer anything but that which stands in the way of our own ultimate self-discovery. The great battle is not a battle between Israel and the Arabs. The great battle is between our external nature, our lowly character, our stupidity, our inability to recognize the truth on the one hand, and the incredible, indwelling truth and marvel that is within us. This is the great battle. This is Armageddon. And this is the Armageddon for which we can win. We can succeed. We can conquer if we are only open to the guidance and to the blessing that is available to us. So let's try to keep that in mind. We are not here in order to be Republicans or Democrats. We are not here in order to take sides in some battles in the Middle East. We are here to find a treasure that is deeply hidden but present, a treasure that from time to time flames up like a magnificent, huge diamond in our vision, and which says, "This is you. You are myself, and I am you," and work to accomplish that. And this can be done. This has been done. This is what the saints have done. This is what the gods and the goddesses of old, because I have to throw that in, that there was always there are two paths in which the divinities travel. The one of them is what we might envision as down, out from the great deific structure, out from heaven, and the other one is into heaven. And that was the way that was greatly cultivated by the Greeks and the Romans, for instance. Why? Because if you led the kind of life and did the kind of things that the gods demanded of you, you could join them. You could join them. You could first become a hero, then become a demigod or demigoddess, and then become a god yourself. And there you are in touch with the highest. So these are all metaphors that were given to us in order to indicate that we have a magnificent, a joyous, an incredibly wonderful future if we only take advantage of it. But if we don't, if we concentrate on the physical, if we become materialists as well as secular, if we begin to not to take advantage of the spiritual opportunities that are available to us, then, to use a colloquial word, folks, then we have lost it. We have lost it. We have lost a great gift that was put into us, and we have exchanged it for a paltry and unhappy condition. Let's not do that. We don't have to do that. We have enough inducement to move toward the divine. We have enough inducement to move toward that which is both the divine inside of us and the divine outside of us. And when these two can be joined together, when our outer vision and our inner recognition come together and are joined, then there is no force in heaven or on earth that can avail against that. Then the victory is assured. Then our coming into our true nature is indeed there, and we will be in it, and we will be enlightened, we will be happy, and we will be glorious. It can be done, it has been done, and it will be done. And I dearly hope and pray for all of us that it will be done by us. So thank you very much.